From South Carolina Public Radio, this is the South Carolina Lede. I'm your host, Gavin Jackson, and this episode was recorded on March 10th, 2025 from South Carolina Public Radio Studios here in Columbia. On this episode of The Lede, it is budget week in South Carolina, specifically the House of Representatives, with lawmakers in session already today, on Monday, debating the $14 billion spending plan that will soon head to the Senate. This comes as the federal government teeters on a shutdown that could happen on Friday. We'll see. It's a long week. And Senator Lindsey Graham was in Columbia on Monday, where he spoke about Ukraine and other priorities. And in a Where Are They Now update, former 1st District Republican candidate Katie Arrington has a major new gig. Now, sadly, we are a little bit busy today, and by we, I mean me, so we will not have a wind-down section.
Oh, no!
It's daylight savings time. It's just ruining all of us. Because of that, everything got moved up. Things got moved around. You know what's going on. Let us know how it's affecting you, the DST at 803-563-7169. Let us know how you're coping, what you do. Hopefully you're taking it easy this week, giving some people grace, because daylight saving time really does take it out of us. 803-563-7169. And thank you. All right, let's look at what's on tap this week. Like we said in the State House, it is budget week in the House, and that debate got underway today on Monday, and the Senate will continue on its tort reform debate. Easy, guys. We, again, don't really know where this might be going, but we did see that liquor liability bill move from the House to the Senate, so that's always waiting in the wings in the Senate if tort reform falls under its own weight. But we'll have more on all that in a moment. Up in Congress, they are in session this weekend. The federal government runs out of money on Friday. Unless a continuing resolution is passed, we'll see. On the economic calendar, we get February Consumer Price Index numbers on Wednesday to see how inflation's doing. What do you guys think? Is it going to be good or bad? Let us know. And on the Sunday shows, well, you know who was on one? Senator Lindsey Graham. He was on Fox News Sunday, where he said that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky blew it in the Oval Office the other day when it came to the minerals deal between the war-torn country and America. Graham said to continue giving Ukraine what they need, including weapons and the continuance of intelligence sharing, and he said that he will introduce more sanctions against Russia, especially if they don't come to the table for ceasefire talks. He said abandoning Ukraine would be worse than leaving Afghanistan. But I'm not bringing you clips from that interview. Rather, the senior senator, who's over the Senate Budget Committee, was before the Columbia Rotary Group on Monday, where he elaborated on that sentiment about Ukraine and Afghanistan. It's the same day report, and that's why we are running and gunning. Also, the audio is a little roomy. Here is Senator Graham.
Now, when we pulled out of Afghanistan, it was a complete debacle. I think that sent a signal to Putin and other people, weakness abounds, and let's take a shot. The number of people who died in this war, nobody really knows, but we're in hundreds of thousands. This thing could have been prevented, should have been prevented, but it wasn't. And all wars need to come to end, but this war needs to come to end quickly because the carnage is unbelievable. I've been there more times than I can count. I know Joe has. The bad guy is Putin. Ukraine's not perfect, but they'll be a good ally over time. I'd rather have them fighting with us than almost any army on the continent of Europe. These people will fight. So how do we end this war? We find a way to have a ceasefire, then we sit down and talk about a solution, a peace deal. And I'm not going to push Ukraine to do something they can't accept, but I will push them to think hard about what they can accept. Putin will come to the table only when you make it. I will be introducing sanctions against Russia this week, early next week, hitting them in the banking sector and the energy sector. They're very much fossil fuel dependent to try to drive him to the table. On Ukraine, and he should, but we need to turn our attention to Russia. The minerals deal. I've been working on this thing for 2.5 years. Ukraine is the richest country in the continent of Europe in terms of critical minerals. All the things you need for the AI economy. There's a deal to be made there, and it will change the narrative on Ukraine. There are a lot of Republicans, particularly, that don't understand why we're fighting this war, what winning looks like and when it's going to end, and they're more worried about dealing with problems here at home. I get that to a point. But when you take your eye off the ball on evil over there, it eventually comes here. Remember 9/11? So you got to do multiple things at the same time. My hope is that we'll sign this minerals deal. It is a good deal for both countries. They need somebody to help them to extract the resources they own. It is in our interest to be the country that helps them. $500 billion to our economy over time, a revolution of how the Ukrainian economy works if we can extract these minerals in a sound way. So this minerals deal gives us an economic interest that we don't have today in Ukraine.
Graham took about half a dozen questions from the 100 Rotarians, including one who was sad about how Graham called on Zelensky to resign following that blow-up between Vice President J.D. Vance in the Oval Office. Take a listen to this full Q&A right here.
Senator, thank you for being here. I'm a lifetime Republican and a supporter of yours over the years. I kind of wish you were president right now, honestly.
Yeah, been there, done that, didn't work.
But you made a good run at it.
T-shirt.
Anyway, my comment is, and I'd like you to comment on my comment basically, the negotiating session between Zelensky and President Trump a short time ago, televised, which in my opinion should not have happened, should have been done in private. Anything that sensitive should not be on public television. But I think his intention was to embarrass a duly elected president of a country at war. And it really made me sad. And I thought some Republicans would speak out about that. And I heard you after that session comment on the fact that Zelensky was disrespectful or whatever. I didn't see any of that in his comments. I really felt sorry for the man, and you broke my heart with
Sorry
your
about
comments.
that. But I don't want to mislead you. I've been working my ass off to get this deal done. I've been to Ukraine 8 times trying to sell this deal. And I met with President Zelensky along with 10 senators the morning before the meeting. The guy sleeps 2 hours a night. He's going to go down in history as a Churchill-type leader. But you got to remember, Churchill lost in 1945. Because all he knew was war. And when they had an election, he lost. Do you remember that? Isn't it hard to believe that Churchill lost in 1945? It's not for me. I understand it better. I told President Zelensky, let's don't litigate security guarantees around the minerals deal. You're not going to get security guarantees in the mineral deal. You may say something about Putin you don't like. Let's just stay focused. J.D. Vance and I actually helped craft the minerals deal. For 30 days, it was on again, off again. Why did we want to put it on TV? To show unity between the countries. I wanted Putin to see his signing in Washington of a deal that would integrate our economies, give us a stake in Ukraine we don't have today. The last question was a Polish journalist who was taking a shot at Trump about being too friendly to Putin, and JD jumped in for Trump, and the rest is history. Zelensky jumps in with JD and they go back and forth, and it should have been done off camera, I agree with that. But trust me on this one. I know exactly what went on, more than anybody in the world, and they screwed it up. It's back on track. Trump received a letter from Zelensky saying, I regret what happened, and we're good to go.
There was surprisingly little talk about the pending shutdown or possible recession. Maybe that's an optimistic thing right there. Though Graham did talk about that need for spending cuts and a mixed blessing of Doge cuts. Now, originally, Graham wanted his budget reconciliation bill focusing on immigration, security, and military funding to move through Congress before this week because of the shutdown. But things got tangled between the House slow-walking its budget plan, which also included major tax cuts, versus Graham's two-budget bill plan. Now, I want to end this Graham segment with him talking about his approach to his job because I think people are always questioning his political stripes. He's always referred to as being very slippery with things, but at the end of the day, he's moving and grooving, and that's politics. So here's Graham.
There is no way you're going to have major immigration reform without bipartisanship. There's no way you're going to get this country out of debt without bipartisanship. So people hate me for a variety of reasons, and you always want to give people good choices. I do too much with Democrats. I don't do enough with Democrats. I'm a war hog. I'm not a war. What I've tried to do over my time is be logical to the extent politics will allow you to be logical. Keep my job, but not be afraid of my job. When this job is so important to you that you're afraid to do it the way you would like, you need to leave. And I'm here to tell you, I don't trust Putin 1 ounce, John, but it's time for this war to end. And I'm here to tell you, all this Doge stuff, some of it's really good, some of it not so much. I'm glad they're doing it, but that don't get you out of debt. The hard things and the big things have to be done together. And I'm hoping before President Trump leaves that he'll sit down and do something on immigration. He's the best Republican to do it because nobody doubts he wants to secure our border.
From one budget to another, let's look at the State House of Representatives, where as we're taping this podcast, the budget debate is already underway. Could you believe it? It's happening, and we're talking.
Wow.
It is indeed a Vote-a-Rama. I know, it's exciting. I know, we get to say Vote-a-Rama a lot more often, especially as lawmakers start with an overview discussion of the budget bill, and then they go through each section of its funding components, including individual agency budgets, and take roll call votes on those sections. Then lawmakers will also offer amendments that will be voted on, hence the Vote-a-Rama. All these roll call votes, you can find them on scstatehouse.gov if you are so inclined. That's where everything lives. But these can become contentious.
Interesting.
And the House Freedom Caucus members have in the past taken pictures of the voting board to show how other Republicans, which they do not caucus with, i.e. hang out with, are against their ultra-conservative stances, which they believe should be the only way the party should vote. So some conflict there among that supermajority in the House. It's like imagine 2 lunch tables.
Uh-huh.
And they're always throwing food.
Uh-huh.
You get it.
Uh-huh.
That was me summing up the State House chamber for you. Now, this also comes out through provisos when we're talking about making these stands, making these votes on amendments that could be, they're signaling, they're virtue signaling essentially on these votes. Those provisos are 1-year rules, though, and that's where debate typically gets to be a bit fierce. In the past, we've seen provisos passed that include prohibiting critical race theory concepts being taught in K-12 schools, as well as outlawing transgender athletes in bathrooms, etc. But at the end of last week, reporters spoke with House leadership on a variety of issues. But then I pivoted to how they expect to see the budget play out. Take a listen to how excited everyone was for that. Here's House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Bruce Bannister, a Republican from Greenville.
How do you expect the budget debate to go next week?
Well, okay. Well, Chairman Bannister, why don't you come back there?
I don't see why that was funny.
I was staying way in the back.
You're trying to
Anyone who wants to answer can answer.
I think we got a really good budget. I think we hit the priorities that are the majority of the members in the House they feel are important. So I would expect some amendments, but I think it should be a very smooth budget process.
The $14 billion budget crafted by Bannister's committee includes an additional let's just make it $667 million in recurring revenues, which is a testament to our growing state and its tax base, because recurring money comes from tax revenues, and when there's extra tax revenues, that means we're growing. You guys see this?
Yes.
And there's also $1.2 billion in one-time money that comes from previous surpluses thanks to conservative budgeting and spending and, of course, the growing economy. Now, the one-time money will help with new and old capital investment and deferred maintenance needs across state agencies and helps fund an additional $200 million in bridge work across the state. I'm getting a lot of bridge work done. The trolls will love this. And we'll have more on SCDOT in a forthcoming episode, so stay tuned. We got the state of SCDOT, which I know you guys love. I know I do. It's always infrastructure week around here. Now, whereas recurring revenue funds, the operational needs and salary increases, such as raising starting teacher pay by an additional $1,500 to $48,500, and a 2% cost of living pay raise for state employees, as well as some bigger increases for those lower paid state government jobs. Recurring dollars also go toward entitlement spending like Medicaid and Medicare costs, our state matches, as well as state employee health insurance costs that continue to climb. And this year may include a premium increase to employees to cover such high costs, which the governor has called unsustainable. At least that's what a budget proviso is proposing to do. We'll see if that sticks around, and we'll also see what the Senate does. But we have more from Bannister on an increased funding request from the governor's office for more school resource officers, which is a priority of the governors to have at least one SRO in every school.
We have a very good relationship with the Governor McMaster in discussions of the budget. There was some issues with the way the SROs were funded, which is why we didn't meet his request in H1. I believe we'll have figured those out by the time the budget gets through the House the second time. Certainly, if the Senate puts the money in, we are likely to hold it. We just wanted some answers based on what we understood was fully funding it 2 years ago and last year, and now this year they needed another 147 positions. We said we didn't think there were that many new schools. Where are all these new positions coming from? So we just wanted to dig into that. They didn't have that data ready for us when it was time for us to put the money in, so we didn't put it in, not because we disagree with the idea that every school needs an SRO, and that's a safety issue, but only because we didn't have the data and felt like we needed to get to the bottom of the increasing request every year. So really, this is not a disagreement with him about a priority, and we're going to make him happy with that at the end. It was just a timing issue on getting the information.
Meanwhile, members of the far-right House Freedom Caucus, who see the budget debate as the best time and way to push their policy agenda items to the dismay of others who say if they want actual binding policy to be made, they should go through the committee process, which the House Freedom Caucus would, but they note that their members are not a part of any of the major committees like Ways and Means or Judiciary. That's because it's a stick and carrot approach as a result of previous actions they have taken against the Republican caucus, who's in control. So if you're saying mean things about the leaders ain't going to put you on the good committees. So that's a stick.
Yes.
And that's because the Freedom Caucus doesn't really jive with a lot of the things the Republican caucus is doing, like failing to commit to internal party policies, saying that they won't run or campaign against fellow Republicans in the chamber. That's not how they see politics. But that didn't stop the Freedom Caucus, which is made up of about 15 folks and led by Goose Creek Republican Representative Jordan Pace, from unveiling their alternative budget an hour before debate started on Monday. Here's Pace.
We're about to start the budget debate, first round of it, and we are excited to talk about how to save the people of South Carolina on their taxes and to shrink their government. The basis of today is going to be to, one, cut taxes. We're going to introduce the idea that we should cut taxes, the income tax, by a full percentage point down to 5%. That's an 18% cut. To do that, we're going to have to cut spending by about $1 billion. We believe we have the amendments to do that. We hope our colleagues will agree, and we'll be presenting those today and tomorrow and however long it takes. Ultimately, we want to enact the Trump agenda in South Carolina. So not only is that lowering taxes and lowering spending and shrinking the size of government, it's also putting priorities first. So from our perspective, one of the reasons we can't seem to get roads right and infrastructure right is because we're doing all this other stuff that isn't roads, infrastructure, education, K through 12 education, courts, delivering justice. The things that are constantly complained about by our constituents aren't getting the full attention from the legislature because we're funding things like the Arts Commission and Film Commission and all this other stuff. It's not only distracting away from the dollars, but away from our attention. So those things come together to enact the Trump agenda here in South Carolina. We're going to have a lot of amendments. I don't know how long it'll take, but from our perspective, this is the main thing we're sent here to do from our constituents, to do this work, and we're happy to come and do it with a big smile on our faces.
Thanks to Mayan Schechter for that audio. We'll bring you an update on Saturday about how the House budget shakes out. It's, of course, going to get changed because it's going to the Senate next. And it's going to come back, they're going to talk, they're going to conference committee, blah, blah, blah. So this is just the beginning of the budget process. And on the way out, the U.S. Department of Defense announced last week that one-time 1st Congressional District Republican candidate and former state representative Katie Arrington has been named Acting Chief Information Officer at the Pentagon. In this capacity, she serves as the primary advisor to the Secretary of Defense for Information Management, IT, information assurance, as well as non-intelligence space systems, critical satellite communications, and a lot more. That's according to the DoD. So kind of a big deal. Now, prior to assuming this role, she served as the Deputy Chief Information Officer for Cybersecurity. Now, a little background here, because in 2021, Arrington was placed on leave in connection with an alleged unauthorized disclosure of classified information from a military intelligence agency, and her security clearance was suspended. She eventually settled a lawsuit over the matter against the DoD in 2022. And then going back to her political career, Arrington ran for Congress in 2018, defeating Congressman Mark Sanford in the Republican primary. But she lost to Democrat Joe Cunningham in the general election, flipping that low country district Democrat for the first time in 40 years. Then State Representative Nancy Mace beat Cunningham in the 2020 race by less than 2 points. Redistricting later that year made the district safely Republican. Arrington challenged Mace in the 2022 Republican primary and lost to Mace despite having the backing of then former President Donald Trump. And that's it, folks. We have no wind down, but give us a shout, 803-563-7169, so we have some fodder for our next wind down. AT has a list, guys, and you're going to hear it if you don't call, okay? Not my words. He's literally telling me this. I'm fearing for the wind down where he breaks out the list. Please call 803-563-7169. But thanks for listening to the pod, y'all. Show us your appreciation by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or a voicemail at 803-563-7169. And you can always stay up to date with the latest news on scetv.org and southcarolinapublicradio.org. That's where the State House gavel lives. Also, don't forget to support your local newspapers. The South Carolina Lede is a production of South Carolina Public Radio. Our producer is A.T. Shire. Amy Crouch is our supervising producer. Sean Birch is our executive producer. This podcast is produced with support from PRX and is made possible in part by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as listener contributions to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. For the South Carolina Lede, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina. Was that the name of one of the villains? Venom? Is it just Venom?
Bad Spider-Man?
Yeah.
Venom.
Venom?
Yeah, she's a symbiote.